David Letterman a lot. Letterman used to be famous for his top 10 lists. Do you remember those? So here are a few of, I'm not going to read the whole list, of the top things you never hear in church. Hey, it's my turn to sit in the front pew. I was so enthralled I never noticed your sermon went 25 minutes over. I love it when we sing hymns I've never heard before. Since we're all here, let's start the service early. Pastor, we'd like to send you to that Bible seminar in the Bahamas. And the number one thing that you never hear in church, nothing inspires me and strengthens my commitment more than our stewardship campaign. If you Google it, which I obviously did, you'll probably find more jokes about stewardship than anything else in church life. No doubt because it's a subject that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. I get that. And most clergy aren't thrilled about preaching on stewardship either. In general, I think, we are not comfortable talking about our money with other people. And I've even met a few people over the years that don't think we should be talking about it at all in church. I think the underlying cause of all this discomfort with stewardship among both clergy and congregation is the unfortunate way we tend to compartmentalize our faith. We think about faith on Sundays or during rites of passage such as baptism or dedication, but we don't want to think about it when we decide how to prioritize our time or our checkbook, decide what jobs we're going to take, or what political candidates we support. But today's scripture reading calls this public-private dichotomy into question, asserting that our faith in God should influence all aspects of our lives. The story of Jesus and the rich man is presented in all three synoptic gospels, so we can't really get around dealing with it. Its challenge has been met with very creative responses to dealing with what many people would say is a very ridiculous and extreme demand from Jesus. So commentators have attempted to tone down this passage over the centuries and make this story softer. For example, commentaries claim that Jesus doesn't really want you to go and sell all your stuff. He just wants you to appreciate it more. Just show your parents a little gratitude when they buy you that Xbox 360 game. Or just say a longer prayer before dinner. Jesus doesn't really mean this passage the way it's written. Others have said that this text isn't about how much money you have, but it's about the kingdom of heaven and about how there's nothing that you can do to earn your way in. Rich or poor, we're all sinners in need of God's grace and forgiveness. I like these understandings of the text because when I think about the story in these ways, my money never enters into the picture. But what if this story is actually about money? Our relationship with money and its ability to make us sad and sick. Between Mark, Matthew, and Luke, this man is described as being rich, young, and a ruler. As a single woman, I noticed that what they don't say is whether or not he's available. Despite the fact that this man has led a rather exemplary life, he boldly admits that something is still missing. He's suffering from a form of dis-ease. Even though it seemed like he had everything he could possibly want, this man knew that something was missing from his life. So he runs up to Jesus, hoping he'll find out what that might be, and kneels before him. Now, in the Gospel of Mark, just about everyone who kneels before Jesus is either sick themselves or has a loved one who is. The leper, the story of Jairus and his daughter, and the story of the hemorrhaging woman. Now this rich man who has tried so hard to be good and wants for nothing, kneels before Jesus, which means that maybe this man is sick, heartsick, and in need of healing. Maybe he's learned that having all the money in the world doesn't solve all your problems. Maybe he's learned that you can lose a bit of yourself in making sure that you're always the smartest or the richest or the most beautiful. I love the response. Verse 21 says, Jesus looks at him and loves him. He sees him, really sees him, the man behind the wealth and the power, and he loves him. Maybe God does, in fact, care what we do with our money for at least two reasons. First, Scriptures and the teachings of Jesus confirm that of all the things in the world that might cause us to lose sight of the importance of our neighbors and our role in caring for one another, and might cause us to question our decision to be followers of Jesus, it's probably money. Remember, Jesus talked about money more than any other topic, more than healing, more than love even. The young man is a reminder that not all stories have a happy ending, and not every encounter with Jesus was a comfortable one. So could it be that this passage is challenging us to discipleship? The need to follow Jesus completely and to be always aware of the things that keep us from following him completely. Verse 17 says that Jesus is again on the way. And in Mark, this isn't just a journey in the general sense. In Mark, all the stories are moving towards something, perhaps representative of our own journey of faith and our own call to always be following the way of Jesus. Looked at in this way, then, Jesus' call to us isn't a call to a life of poverty, but to one of faithfulness. This passage challenges us today the way perhaps Jesus was challenging this rich young ruler, that only by letting go of what we have put our trust in, the things that we think we have security in, can we ever really find the life that we long for. And whatever those things are might be different for each of us, but we all have them. Jesus doesn't try to deprive this rich man of his money and power, the way some people think. He simply wants more for his life. He wanted him to have the adventure of discipleship, which means leaving the old way of life based on his money behind. The second reason, I think, that God does care what we do with our money and our relationship to it is because how we spend our money has a great impact on our own well-being and on what our church community can do. How does it affect our well-being? Perhaps Jesus believed that it's difficult for the rich to enter the kingdom, as verses 24 and 25 say, because we live under the illusion that we are made sufficient by our wealth, with no need for God or others. Perhaps it also desensitizes us to the needs of those around us, which is maybe why what Jesus told the rich man to give his money to the poor rather than just leave it at home and follow him. In the creation narrative, we hear God say that it is not good for us to be alone. Might it be that God, in God's wisdom, knows how easy it is for us, like the rich young ruler, to withdraw from those around us, to withdraw from our neighbors when we think we have everything we need? Could it be then that Mark sees this passage as a kind of healing of that, of the heart sickness that comes with an addiction to money and invites us to do the same? Looked at in this way, Jesus' words aren't some extreme requirement for getting into heaven or some radical test of faith, but rather they are a radical prescription to a deep need within all of us. We know that money doesn't make us happy, logically, but don't sometimes we act like it does? I'll be the first to admit that I've engaged in some retail therapy more than once. I also worked for many years for the Federal Reserve and spent most of my early career before ministry thinking about money. So it would be easy for me to become obsessed with it instead of being generous and sacrificial. I admit that sometimes I still see financial stability and security as more significant in life than it really is. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. For example, here are some things that we don't question as true. Money buys better housing, better health care, better education, and more world experiences. It helps protect our loved ones, and it makes us less dependent on others. As a single woman with 2 children and 1 income, I think about things like this more than I would like to admit to you. But here's the danger. While we focus and worry about these things, we can miss life's greatest treasure. If you doubt the truth of that, just notice for one day how many times money crosses your mind, how it makes you worry or makes you feel secure, or requires decisions, or inspires daydreams, or sometimes squashes them. I think this is the greatest danger that we live with. Not that we will outlive our resources, but that we will live out our days on earth too preoccupied with our resources to recognize the incredible invitation that Jesus invites us to join him on the journey of faith. And not just that, but that he invites us to partner with God to empower others in the church and community to join as well. I don't know if money has the ability to put you at dis-ease, make you feel sick or sad. I don't know if you're longing for something more. And maybe for some of you today, this just does not sound like good news. This idea that God has his eye on our bank account, watching what we do with our resources. But maybe, just maybe, the sheer fact that God is looking at us at all is part of the good news. Maybe what it means is that God actually cares about this life, your life and my life. And God actually cares about what we do with it, which means that what we do matters. What we do with our money matters. What we do with our time matters. What we do with our lives matter. Not because God looks upon us as a judge, but because God looks upon us like Jesus did the rich young ruler and loves us and wishes for us a whole heart and a whole life. And not just for you and me, but for every person in our world. And maybe God is counting on that partnership with you so that the church can be empowered to be an effective alternative to our culture today. Stewardship is not about begging for resources and raising money. It's about raising disciples. It's about making God's interests more important than our own. Henry Nouwen says in his book, The Spirituality of Fundraising, it's an invitation to invest yourself through the resources God has given you in this work to which God has called us. It's just as important, just as spiritual as participating in communion, attending a Bible study, or providing a listening ear to someone who needs it. It's an act of worship and trust, which is why we do it in worship. We can't empower the church without you. In the end, I don't think simple explanations do this story justice. This is the kind of story that needs to be experienced rather than explained. Experienced in a way that will keep us focused on the real-life joy of discipleship and on the seriousness of the kingdom in God, of the kingdom envisioned by Jesus and his disciples. The rich young ruler had followed all the religious laws, which included love of neighbor, keeping the Sabbath, not stealing, working for justice, and more. He was a good person. But there was one area of his life that he had compartmentalized from his faith. He was probably like the church member who was serving at the homeless shelter on the weekend, but wasn't letting his faith touch his wallet or his bank account. Now compare his story to one I heard recently about a single woman who lived her whole life in the little neighborhood Methodist church in New Jersey. She had never married, never had children. She had worked her whole life as a librarian at the public school. She wasn't a key leader in the church, but she gave what she could and served faithfully in the church's food pantry and attended church regularly. When she died, no one expected any money to come to the church. She certainly hadn't told anyone about a gift from her estate. In fact, they didn't even think she had an estate on a librarian's salary. A check came in the mail to the church for $150,000. Turns out, she had left the church every penny she had ever saved, and it was an incredibly generous gift. We as a church offer a new way of being in the world, a new kind of peace, a new kind of community. Myers Park Baptist Church especially has a long and strong history of being a new kind of light in this community, taking the lead on issues that honestly, I can tell you from experience, most Protestant churches are too scared to talk about. But realistically, it does take resources to be able to do that and to provide all the incredible programs that we offer every year. Each and every person can make a difference in how we empower the church. And in turn, we get to experience the joy of being part of a higher purpose that seeks to bring hope and transformation to the lives of so many people. We answer a holy calling to exchange an unhealthy relationship with money for a passion to engage with people in need. We receive the blessing of sharing life with those who are inspired by common values and a desire to bring justice, truth, and beauty to life, not just for ourselves, but for all people. This kind of joy comes not in what we keep, but in what we give away. Amen.